welcome to Night Caller's Bigfoot Radio. It is February 10th, 2019. You're here with your hosts, Lori Hood and Lauren Smith. How you doing tonight, Lori?
I'm doing great. How are you doing tonight, Lauren?
Fabulous. It's really, really cold here.
And it's really, really warm here.
Yeah.
Well, you know, the groundhog did what? He saw his shadow, so that means that we're having... did he see his shadow or did he not? Now, let's get that
I can't.
first. I don't know either, but all I know is end result is that we're supposed to have an early spring. And I feel like there may be some truth to that down here in deep East Texas because I have a fan in the window and I'm hot. Yes, but where you're at in Tulsa, it is cold, right?
It is freezing here. Freezing. Like, it was 15 degrees last week in Tulsa. It was beyond ridiculous. Like, and we're griping, and he's from North Dakota, and he's like, we swim in a swimming pool full of snow year round.
Yeah.
What?
Did you guys just want me to chime? Did you just want me to chime in?
Sure, Jack. Everyone, this is Jack Cary, our guest.
I felt compelled because I grew up in Tulsa, and most of my absolutely. I went to Memorial High School.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, and most of my family is from Texas. So that's interesting that you guys are from there. I'm currently in South Dakota, and you guys don't know what cold is down there.
You're up there where those people throw the hot water in the air and let it freeze, and they're being stabbed in the eyeball with icicles. And
yeah. Well, they tell me I'm not from here. I grew up in Oklahoma, so it's tough to get used to that kind of cold. But they tell me it's the worst winter since 1996. I guess I'll have to take them at their word.
Yeah.
But the other 2 weeks ago, it was with the wind chill that almost hit minus 60. So that was,
Oh my gosh, I'm talking about 15 degrees.
Yeah, that was something, And
how did you stay warm in the house? It had to have been like 32 degrees in the house, even with the heaters going and everything.
No, these houses are made for it up here. Like, they are insulated like crazy when they build them, and you're warm and comfy and cozy. You don't even notice it when you're inside. So.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but these people are used to the cold up here, so their houses are really, really insulated. So me and my wife ended up buying a house. Yeah, what's that?
How did the wildlife survive that?
That's a good question. Like they do. But all of the cattle, they almost had to declare an emergency, or did in some areas, because they just freeze to death out there. So, but it's as cold up here in the winter as it is hot down there in the summer. How about that?
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. I could not live where you're living right now. Like, I'm basically a chihuahua. Like, I will shake and shiver dramatically. I mean, I seriously, when it was 15 degrees, I was leaving class to go get in my car, and I was on the phone with my friend, and I was shivering so bad that I couldn't talk. Like, I could not formulate words. And it was 15 degrees.
It's really true. When I go to her house, I just die because they have it like 80 degrees. It's balmy. They can grow palm trees in their living room. It is that warm in there. And I die. I have to have the window open and everything so I can even sleep. It's bad.
That's funny. Yeah, you don't know that. I looked on the weather last week. There was a day when it was like 67 in Tulsa. I was like, are you kidding me?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Pretty bad.
I'm like, that's Florida.
Bad.
Yeah.
Close.
Well.
So do you have, I mean, I guess, you discussed the wildlife kind of, but do you see a lot of rampant wildlife when it's this cold?
No, you don't. I mean, it's interesting because this city in Sioux Falls, it's called Sioux Falls, and it's down in the southeastern corner of the state, but there's 1 million rabbits in this town. I mean, they're literally, like in the summer, you can open up your back door and they just go running everywhere. So, and you don't see a one of them, outside hopping around. You're like, wow, what happened to all of those, There were even birds, stay midway through the winter that left eventually because it just got so cold this year. But what can you do?
So how long have you been in South Dakota, Jack?
Only about a year. Me and my wife ended up buying a home here because she's from here, and we were actually looking after her parents. So.
I see.
But I spent the last 25 years in Colorado and grew up in southern Oklahoma, McAllister for a while, and then the rest of my
talking about our old stomping grounds.
Yeah. So how
I have to say you really don't have an accent. I bet they say you do though.
You don't.
Yeah, that's funny because it's funny because they're like, well, have him drink a beer, and when I do, I speak just like the rest of my family. Yeah, but I've traveled around so much, I learned to lose the accent so that people couldn't automatically say, are you from Oklahoma? Are you from Texas?
Yes. Yep.
Well, I'm stuck with mine. I know. I can't. I am totally hick. I mean, just really. And that's it. I just.
You're just country, like my family.
Yes, very country. I appreciate you saying that, though. I do. Okay, so let's ask you about yourself. Okay. You are founder of the Paranormal Intelligence Agency. Now, I have to ask you, what does the Paranormal Intelligence Agency do?
I basically designed the organization to run very much like an intelligence agency, but targeting paranormal activity and events. It occurred to me that what a very interesting thing or way to go about paranormal research would be to come across accounts of people encountering paranormal events and then going to investigate those events outside of any contact with a witness or the news agency or anything else to see if you could verify that information. And if we had a number of people actually doing field research right now, it would still be operating like that. But what we do now basically is compile intelligence reports from hundreds of different, reports that come into us, news sources, you name it. You can find it all on our website, which is just paranormalintelligenceagency.com. You can just Google that or Google my name and the website will pop up. So
does this cover UFOs as well?
It does, and alien abduction and really all forms of paranormal activity, everything from missing people to What I talk about is my unified field theory of paranormal activity, which I talk about in my new book coming out, which is Paranormal Planet, about a thing called the Mach Effect, and I propose that this might be a scientific solution to what might be happening to a lot of the missing people in the national park system that David Paulides has researched and written about for a long time. And that theory, kind of to make a long story short, is that there's a scientist who discovered that when matter travels through space, there's like minute fluctuations within that matter, and he discovered a way to tap in and take advantage of those fluctuations and create a viable form of energy that you could use for thrust. So in the future, you could have like an engine for a spacecraft that would use the fluctuations of the spacecraft to generate energy and propel it along. And that fascinated me. And what really fascinated me was that in this paper, and then there was a subsequent documentary about it, it says that there's 3 side effects to what they call the Mach Effect. And the third one is the construction of benign wormholes. And all of a sudden I was like, wow, that's amazing, because what you have on the Earth is a body of mass traveling through space, and there's minute fluctuations occurring, and there's these gigantic deposits of quartz crystal all around the planet that are just underneath the topography, and many of them in our most heavily forested areas are where you're going to find these large quartz crystal deposits. As the Earth is traveling through space and it begins to fluctuate, it's causing a stress within those quartz crystals. And when you push them together, they begin to ionize. And when they ionize, they create these electromagnetic fields that are hundreds of times stronger than the surrounding countryside, maybe even thousands of times stronger. And what they end up doing is actually tearing a hole in the electromagnetic membrane that separates this dimension from the next. And you can have momentary interaction occurring between these dimensions, and that's what we describe as paranormal.
I see. Wow. You explained that so well. I don't know if it lost anyone else out there, but I actually was able to follow that. That is so interesting. I'm really amazed at myself, honestly. Wow. So in other words,
these people, and I proposed this to David, and I know him, and he's done a phenomenal job researching those missing cases, and it could be a viable explanation, maybe not, but it is my working theory at this time for a lot of these missing people. Maybe not all. Maybe there's 2 or 3 different things occurring. So
you think they may have ventured into another dimension and they can't get back?
Literally, that they just step off into oblivion in a heartbeat. Can you imagine a worse fate than that? All of a sudden, you're in a completely different existence with other creatures. See, that's the crazy thing about it is, and I write about this in my book, is that in all of these conferences all around the world right now, there are physicists who are writing papers and talking to each other about the existence of parallel dimensions. This is the hottest new topic. Like, they have proven that they're there. So, and they're proposing that if they're there has to be some form of intelligent life forms living on those dimensions. And they even go as far as to say in some of their papers, it could very well be that some of those intelligent life forms have discovered a way into this dimension, that they could be that advanced. See how they're dancing around the word paranormal. They don't want to say it. But that's what their papers are saying, and they're talking about amongst themselves, And I talk about that in my book, and how this is all converging on the same thing, that we're discovering that there's a lot of different parallel dimensions, and that there are things living on them, and maybe you don't want to go messing around there.
Absolutely not. But how can you help it if you just walk right into another dimension?
Right. And that's why I call my book Paranormal Planet, because we literally live on a planet where these wormholes just open up because of the fluctuations of our planet, and because a huge percentage of the underlying topography of the planet is quartz crystal. That's the key. And when you compress that quartz crystal, it ionizes the crystals, and they project these electromagnetic fields that are so strong that they literally rip that barrier between the dimensions, which these physicists call an electromagnetic membrane. That's where I got the term from, is from their paper. So yeah, that's my working theory, and that's all in the book. And a lot of people think that Sasquatch is interdimensional, and I don't know.
Yes, a lot of people do think that. Yes.
Yeah, after all of the field research I did with J.C. Johnson and Crypto Four Corners, and I'm currently the director of Crypto Four Corners just because I took it over in memory of J.C. Johnson, who passed away not too long ago, very young and of pneumonia. So, and he was a huge loss to cryptozoology altogether. Yeah. So, but he was my mentor when it came to actually tracking animals in the field, and taught me a ton. And we saw an amazing amount of evidence out in the field. Over the course of 5-6 years, we came across hundreds of footprints, collected DNA from 2 separate sites with Dr. Christopher Dyer, the executive director at the University of New Mexico.
Wow.
Actually accompanied us to get these DNA samples, and we collected them. What was interesting about these sites was that the DNA was left by animals, and there were eyewitnesses to the DNA being left. In other words, there were people present when the animal actually left the DNA on the, in one case it was a ramshackle kind of shed out on this northern New Mexico property. In the second case, it was a 7-foot tall tree in northern New Mexico, interestingly enough, and it was in a heavily wooded area on a mountain. And we actually went to these 2 different sites. At the first site, we found 17-inch prints, 3 different individuals. One was 17, one was 16, and then there was a larger one that had a 19-inch footprint.
Wow.
But
great.
the property, and there's pictures of all this on my website on the cryptozoology page. You can go there and see pictures of the fur and everything that we actually collected, and that went into its own private genome study, which you can Google. I'm sure if you Google Christopher Dyer and Bigfoot, it ended up being kind of a controversy that the university there was spending money on examining, fairy tale animals, basically, is what it came to be. Yeah, and so there was even news coverage about it, and it was not good for him because he had enough faith, but he saw the evidence. I mean, he went out in the field, saw the footprints that you come across literally in the middle of nowhere. You would have to drive, we drove 2 or 3 miles in heavy 4-wheel drive vehicles through, they're not even roads, they're like trails, and you get out of that and walk another 300, 400, 500 yards into the deep woods, and all of a sudden you come across a line of 100 footprints, and that's supposedly somebody trying to play a hoax. They somehow magically knew that you were going to show up at that exact spot in the middle of nowhere in those woods so that they could play a trick on you. And that's what really catches you when you're doing field research, is that first real find of your own of physical evidence being left on the ground of these creatures.
Wow. Well, let me ask you a question. Do your reports and your investigations, do they go back many, many years, like back to the 30s, or do you have like what I'm getting at is, have you noticed that paranormal activity seems to come, it's almost like an ebb and flow? You have a lot of activity, then it kind of ebbs, and then a lot of activity, and it kind of ebbs again. Have you noticed this in your report?
Well, not in my reports, but in history in general. You have all of the mediumship of the early 1920s and 30s, where people were sitting around tables and conjuring, Uncle Eddie from beyond. And there was, a big resurgence of, I guess, spiritualism of people that were kind of turning away from established religion. And I think that kind of activity does ebb and flow. You can actually trace another example of that all the way back to the French occult revival, where they literally France literally resurrected all of these different, occult secrets and societies and all of this different stuff that came out of medieval times. And, I think there's an ebb and flow that just kind of goes through humanity about it. But I don't know. That's an interesting question.
Also, I have a question to ask you, and this is kind of just a random question. I was going to ask you about ley lines, energy lines, nexus, and things like that. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that plays into exactly what I was talking about, and the energy lines of the planet probably tap into this energy that these scientists are talking about. And in ancient times, apparently people knew about this and were able to use that as a technology. So, I mean, it survives today because they knew it all all these many eons.
So would you say that paranormal activity is on the increase?
I do actually think it's on the increase. I know reports are on the increase. Now, whether or not that's because the population is just growing and you're seeing the exact same percentage of reports in the population, but you just have a larger population and therefore a larger number of reports, or if there's something deeper underlying that, something more sinister of some kind, which is what I think you're getting at. What's interesting to me is that if you study a lot of sort of deep black groups that are both involved with the military and with occult activities, a lot of that activity deals with the idea of opening a doorway to let some sort of malevolence through to the planet. And here you have scientists talking about, you can open a doorway to another dimension, and who knows what's on those other dimensions, It could be the worst thing that anybody's ever even contemplated. So it's interesting those parallels kind of run together in that they're using two different vocabularies to describe exactly the same thing.
Oh, that's interesting. So have you found anything out there that would indicate or that made you wonder if Bigfoot was interdimensional? I hate to put you on the spot like this, but you seem like a fairly scientific person, and I'm not worried that you're going to go
No, in fact,
crazy
I've got in fact, I've got a lot to say about the subject. First of all, one of the first cases that I was on with J.C. Johnson in Crypto Four Corners was what we call the track line, or the furry one track line. JC always liked to call them the furry ones, the furry people. And this was, I don't know, I'm guessing 50 miles onto a Navajo Indian reservation. And then we had to get in 4x4 Jeeps and go up a trail for quite a long ways, so we kind of hit a plateau and came over a few sand dunes on this mesa and got out. And one of the Navajos that was with the group, who was actually grazing a sheep in the area, which is what they do on those mountains, pointed out, over there. And we went over and looked in this field, and there was a line of 19-inch long footprints, and they went on and on and on. I think eventually they ended up being like almost 200 yards of prints, and it was amazing. It looked like this thing started walking, and this is all actually on the Crypto Four Corners. It should be on the Facebook page or the YouTube page, one of the two. But it looked like this creature was strolling along. And it had about a 6-foot stride, and all of a sudden it looks like something spooks it, and it begins to run, and all of a sudden the stride is reaching out 10, 11, 12 feet. This thing's he's really hauling. And all of a sudden at the end of the track line in a huge field where they just should have kept going. There's no trees around or anything. It's the same ground, same vegetation, same everything. And they just stopped all of a sudden in the middle of nowhere. And you're like, oh my God, what do you say to that? What can you say to it? There's no way somebody could have faked hundreds of prints just to get us out there. They're not getting paid anything.
Right. Could it have been a UFO abduction? Obviously he was running from something.
See, that's funny that you say that, because I wrote an article about that called The Abduction of Bigfoot, and I proposed that to JC, and of course he was like, no, that couldn't be it. He was like, I don't know what's going on, but it couldn't be. And I'm like, JC, see, the interesting about it is in 20% of all really credible Bigfoot sightings, the witness, the eyewitness to the Sasquatch also sees a UFO at the same time. That's a really uncomfortable statistic for a lot of people in the Bigfoot community, but it was first documented and written about by Jonathan Keel. All of this can be looked up. And Jonathan Keel was a top-notch paranormal investigator and a very well-known journalist who wrote the Mothman Prophecies and had the whole experience at, Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And he was the first one to actually come by that statistic, which has now been researched by other really credible researchers and proven true. And there's a number of articles about it. So anyway, that's a pattern that we don't know really what that means. But I suspected the same thing that you're talking about, which is maybe these creatures are being abducted by the same creatures that are abducting humans, because in our DNA genome study, we showed that they were in part human. And that's a really scary thing right there. It's the mitochondrial, or the mother's lineage, came out modern human. There's just no denying it in 2 different studies. So that
I know, but how does that happen? How is that happening? You think it's experiments, alien experiments, or do you think that it is reproduction with?
Oh, well, I'll tell you where this led me, because this wasn't an area where I even wanted to be led. In fact, I wouldn't even go there. But then about a couple of months ago, I had a 2-hour conversation with a world-class geneticist who had actually done some testing on some Sasquatch samples, and they changed my mind. So I was like, wow, or at least really shook me up. I've never been scared researching these creatures before, and then this person really kind of got to me. I was like, wow.
Well, what did he say?
Credentials were impeccable, and what they said was, and they confirmed the same thing, that the mitochondrial was in fact human, and that the father's genetic lineage to them looked like a mishmash of 100 different kinds of DNA from 100 different kinds of animals. I mean, they even found like a European polecat in one of the strands. European polecat, which has never even been in North America.
Exactly.
And
that's very interesting, considering that other tests that have been run showed that there was possum and other weird animals. So they thought it was like a fake sample, because it had these weird,
Well, the main problem with Sasquatch DNA, as we discovered in our study, is that there's no gen bank reference to the animal. So, in other words, every single biological animal in the world that's ever been genetically tested has some of that DNA is deposited in the World Gen Bank, and then whenever somebody else tests a sample of the same animal, they put it into the machine that says match. This thing is a turtle from New Guinea, and so you take them a Sasquatch sample and it comes across unknown, and so they're like, oh, it's contaminated. The other part says human, so it's got to be, the DNA is no good other than the human contamination that you put on it.
Oh my, yes, exactly.
So you can't win the DNA battle. And after we did it twice, and we really thought that the first time and the second time, this was it. We got it. We have discovery of the species. This is all over with. And nope, it was unbelievable how quiet the scientific community was. They don't even want to go there in any way, shape, or form. And the only way, there's actually two different ways you can prove Sasquatch exists. One, multiple cameras from multiple angles of multiple animals interacting with one another for a very long duration of time. That's one. Two,
that's what science wants.
Right. Number two is you can recover remains of some kind, and then those can be tested and then entered in the World Gen Bank, and then anybody else that has a sample can submit it, and they'll say, whoop, yep, that's Sasquatch DNA. But unless you get one of those two things, you're never going to prove the species exists. Any photographic evidence that you get is automatically dismissed as a hoax. Any video, dismissed as a hoax. So you're left with those two things and not much else to be able to convince the public of the ultimate reality of their existence.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's going to be disappointing for a whole lot of people out there that are trying to prove their existence.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
And perhaps that's the reason why.
Anyway, yeah.
Lauren, are you trying to say something?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Go ahead.
You said
Jack.
That's the reason why.
I was just gonna finish my point. So after discussing this with the scientist, who also told me that one of his colleagues from the UK had called him on his deathbed. His colleague was dying in the UK, and told him that they had done a study, their government had done a study on samples that they had recovered in British Columbia, Canada. and wanted him to know that their results were identical to what he was telling him about. So, and I will never divulge their names. I never have with any source that we've ever had, and we've had some great sources, and I can talk about some of them in a minute. But what's fascinating is our conversation then led into a biblical explanation. It led into the book of Genesis. It led into the whole idea of the fallen angel mythos, and when it talks about them having children with the daughters of men, and these were giants,
the Nephilim. Yes.
Right. So what you might be seeing is what's described as the fallen angels, mixing their genetics with human women, or you might be seeing ancient people describing aliens taking the DNA and mixing it together with that of human women to create these various animals. And that's what JC thought that we were looking at, that these were remnants of the Nephilim, or the Nephilim, as they call them in the book of Genesis. And because we investigated some scary stuff, and Bigfoot was the least of it, there are some creatures out there that were truly horrifying. And what's interesting is they're all humanoid. And this geneticist told me that they had samples of other humanoid cryptid creatures, and that when they had tested them, the mitochondrial also came up human. So what are we looking at here? Every cryptid creature has a female human lineage. And that's exactly what's described in the book of Genesis. So what are we talking about here? And then you have disappearing track lines along with a pattern of UFOs being seen 20% of all credible sightings. I mean, what does that tell you? And that's what we study and do at the Paranormal Intelligence Agency. This is how we dissect these mysteries and get to, the heart of what we've got to accomplish in order to solve each one.
Wow. So my listeners are going to want to know, what kind of horrendous creatures have you been investigating that are worse than Bigfoot? We got to know.
Look up our Night Stalker case, and I can tell you that a number of witnesses that have experienced so-called dogmen sightings, but these are people that don't even want their names known, who are, it's interesting because in both cases you have what appear to be very sincere witnesses. You have indigenous oral history discussing the creatures. You have physical evidence being left in the form of footprints, etc. And it's interesting because you have that same thing in the Sasquatch mystery. Mm-hmm. It's crazy, but what that tells these people, or what they came to believe, was that this was somehow, these were alien genetic creatures, and the aliens were somehow so advanced with genetics that they just fused a bunch of the different life forms together and could create basically anything they wanted, and ended up creating this creature. That's basically what it came down to. Now, I consider the sources to be quite credible, but beyond that, I can't really tell you. We'll know what we know when we actually have one of the two I already stated above. You got to have one or two.
And this is the Paranormal Planet book that you're discussing that has the stuff in it that we would. Okay. You also authored a book, American Sorcerer. Mm-hmm. And what is this book about?
American Sorcerer it's a very interesting book. It utilizes the CIA's Project Stargate remote viewing control protocols. So, in other words, the CIA ran a remote viewing program. I'm sure a lot of your listeners know what remote viewing is.
Yes.
And which is psychic spying, basically. What's interesting is that using hundreds of millions of dollars, they ended up with a system of controls that allowed them to see whether or not what they were witnessing was in fact controlled psychic functioning, or did it just appear to be controlled psychic functioning. And the controls are really, really rigid. So, I mean, there's the person who makes up the target is 3 different people removed from the actual person who does the viewing, who has no knowledge whatsoever what the target's ever going to be, other than a randomly chosen serial number inside of an envelope. So, I mean, you have you have some serious controls going on there. So they know there's no information leakage. The person who ends up drawing the pictures of the target, they have no clue what the target's supposed to be, nothing, other than a series of like 6, 7 numbers. That's it. So, and they're not like coordinates or anything. It's just a random, the person who actually selects the target writes down a random series of numbers.
So in other words, when they're doing these tests, they're trying to determine whether this person is using a sixth sense, a psychic ability, or whether they're actually doing the remote viewing. Is that what you're trying to say?
No, what I'm trying to say is they figured out a way. No, they figured out a way to keep the person who's doing the remote viewing from ever knowing what the target is. Therefore, if they get a hit on the target, it's proof that they have the psychic ability to do so. It's proof that they can actually remote view, because they never knew what the target was. So if you're targeting, let's say, a submarine out in the ocean and they draw a mountain in Alaska, well, they didn't get the target right. If you're targeting a submarine out in the ocean and they draw a submarine out in the ocean without ever knowing anything about the target, then you've got somebody that has strong controlled psychic functioning at that stage. And you can use them.
What about remote influencing?
Well, that's what I write about in my book. See, I took that. I took all of their controls and protocols, and then I applied them to the techniques that all of these different occult groups were using around the world, because in the end, they were all both doing the same thing and using 2 different vocabularies to describe it, much like what's going on with the interdimensional thing. And so when you take those controls and protocols and then apply it to their techniques, you have an amazing system of controlled psychic functioning, and with that, controlled psychic influencing, because it's all the same signal line. And if you can view something or receive information from something, then you can also transmit on that same line and transmit information. So, and that leads you into all kinds of stuff, transmitting destructive information or positive information. You know, I mean, it's interesting where that leads, which is probably a whole other show somewhere.
Well, and you know, I'd read about that too. I've always been interested in that subject. And I'd read an experiment they did, the 3 different individuals that did the remote influencing. They went into a convenience store where there were several people, and they walked into the convenience store, walked around, stood next to these people, and the whole time they're sending them the transmission that you don't see me. I'm not here. You don't see me. And then they leave the store. And then someone else comes in and says, did you see this man dressed this way? And they go, no, nobody's been in here. So they literally never saw any of those 3 individuals that went into that store doing the remote influencing.
Wow.
And that's just really unbelievable to me. But they were able to send out that message, and these people were picking it up.
It doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, when I was researching for my book, American Sorcerer, I read dozens of books talking about the government's programs with psychic warfare, and how obvious it was to me at the end of that trail of breadcrumbs that they don't talk about it, but it's inferred that after Project Stargate became known and became public and they pulled the funding from it, that they continued the program in secret elsewhere, and that obviously that would evolve into remote influencing. I mean, how handy would it be to get a foreign general to just step out in front of a bus because you've got 3 or 4 psychics that were sending a message to, step out in front of a bus, instead of having a world war. I mean, it's the ultimate weapon. If you can remote influence, especially at a distance, then you've got the ultimate weapon of war. And that actually reminds me to kind of put a plug in for a book that I read recently about alien abduction, and it's called They Walk Among Us. And that's something that's fascinating because it goes back to the whole Bigfoot disappearing sort of problem. Are they being abducted or not? And this book has chronicled so many modern day cases of people who are saying that not only are they being abducted, but that they're apparently being told that there's hybrids being placed now around the planet in societies, and that there's some.
And these they're like alien human mixes.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Oh.
Yeah, and it's Dr. David M. Jacobs from Tulane University, actually. He's written this book, and he wrote a few others that are also pretty hair-raising. But he knew Bud Hopkins, and he studied alien abduction for 40 years, and he began to realize that, oh, my God, these are people that were decades apart from one another, couldn't have known each other, had no contact, and they're all telling the same story. And he began to realize now that in this last book what was occurring, because he's kind of been tracking this over the years. What apparently was occurring was that these hybrids are being placed around in different places around the world, and that the contactees, the UFO contactees, are actually charged with the task of helping them integrate, helping them get apartments, helping them learn how to drive, how to be human.
Oh, my goodness.
Isn't that fascinating? Because when you read the actual research...
Are they aware of that? The humans that have been abducted are...
Well, I mean, yeah, they're aware of it, but they can't do anything about it. And see, that's the point that he keeps trying to make in his research, is that it doesn't matter that these things are technologically more advanced than we are. The problem is that they are neurologically more advanced than we are. And there's no way to overcome a neurological advantage. In other words, these hybrids apparently have the ability to both control human emotion and thought, and therefore action. So it's interesting, but it apparently is within only a certain distance from them, physical distance. So anyway, you'll have
maybe
to read
we do need to be wearing tinfoil on our heads.
Well, I don't know, but read his work and decide for yourselves, because I'm sure there's a lot of people going, oh, yeah, right. And then you read the actual research, and you won't sleep for a good month, 2, maybe 3, till you know.
And what is the name of this book again?
They Walk Among Us is the name of his latest one. But if you just Google David M. Jacobs, Jacobs, you'll see all of his work, and he is a very high-quality researcher that's done really good scientific research for over 40 years, and on top of that was a respected scholar at Tulane University, professor there. So,
wow. Whew. My goodness. It's a scary thought.
Yeah, I consider it to be problem number one in all of paranormal research is that problem. That is problem number one. Until that
alien abduction thing, these people are abducted over and over and over again. It's not just one time. Some are just one time, but
yeah, for the taking of their DNA so that they could actually create these hybrids. And these are, abductees have been shown hybrids since the beginning of them being reported. And it usually looks like a weird conglomeration of a human in one of them. It's got big, large almond eyes, but they're blue, or, you can tell it's a hybrid. And apparently these new ones look completely human. They look perfect.
Wow.
They're perfect in every way, but they have this neurological advantage to them. And that's what's really scary about it. So, but read his research and decide for yourselves, because but read it with with the warning. I give you a warning, because you won't believe what you're reading, but you will at the same time, and it's hard to go to sleep at night after that.
Oh my goodness. My goodness.
Yeah. Welcome to the Paranormal Intelligence Agency.
Yes. It's almost like, I'm thinking of Scully and Mulder. Yeah. Okay, so you have about 8 minutes left. What do you want to talk about in this last 8 minutes?
Well, you mentioned what were some of the crazy creatures that we had hunted.
Yes.
One's called the Nite Stalker case, and there again it was on Navajo reservation land. And what your listeners probably don't know is that JC and I worked very closely with the Navajo tribe. He had actually married a Navajo lady at one time and still had very strong ties with the tribe. And the police force there would often get reports of what they called Yaetso, which is their Bigfoot, that they weren't allowed to investigate. And they knew JC did, so he developed a relationship with them. So pretty much any weird report that any of the Navajo police got would come to us, and we would go out in the field and actually investigate the sighting. And one of those became known as the Nite Stalker case, and this was featured on Monsters and Mysteries on I think it was the Monsters and Mysteries show, which I'm sure you know. And you'll if you watch that show a lot, you'll come across the story. And there was this Navajo girl, and she was living in the back side of this trailer, and they had begun to notice these strange footprints around the window outside of her bedroom. And they were big footprints.
I actually think that JC was on our show and told us this story, because it's ringing very familiar to me.
Yeah,
we had JC on years ago. So, yes, but go ahead. Sure. Yeah.
So,
it's a pleasant reminder. Yes.
Yeah, I know, right? So it's true. This all happened.
Mm-hmm.
These were gigantic prints, and they were like three-toed, and there were claws, and you were like, wow, I've never seen anything like it. And they had a little, like, cornfield that was, I'm guessing, 20, 30 feet from the trailer where the girl slept at night. And in the middle of this cornfield was a big depression. Not anywhere around it. And there weren't footprints leading into anything, like somebody had walked through there. It was like something had come from the sky and landed there in that spot, which is what our tracker at the time, Navajo tracker, told us at the time. This thing came from the air. There's no way it got into this field. There's no prints coming in or out. these guys know how to track. And so this thing landed in this field and then literally flapped its wings and landed outside this girl's bedroom. And so that was the first thing that really scared her and the family, right? So that's problem number one. And then all of a sudden, about a week later, she's laying in bed and she hears this thing going crazy outside, noises that it's making, and all of a sudden it starts shaking the air conditioning unit that was, mounted to the outside and blowing to the inside. This thing was ripping that literally off of the outside of the trailer.
Oh,
and,
no.
Yes. And apparently had some sort of clawed hands because it reached up and with claws tore into the side fabrication, the metal of the actual trailer, a big long gash that was not even related to the air conditioning unit being tossed around. And so it was literally trying to tear its way into this girl's room. And as you'll see on the show there, she became so terrified that she ended up leaving that place to go live with other family members in a completely different town. Yep. So. Oh. Yeah, so that's one of the scary things.
We're going camping next weekend, and we really appreciate these really scary stories right before we go. I'm even afraid to hike out in the woods. I'm worried the crystals will shift around and I'll end up in a fifth dimension.
No, it is. It's spooky. It's spooky once you know that. But once you see those cluster maps that David Paulides has compiled in the CanAmMissingProject.com, it is unbelievable. Hundreds and hundreds of people just vanish into thin air.
Gosh. And what's that website? Because I've never seen that. What is that website you just mentioned?
It's the CanAm or Canadian American Missing.com website. And that's the official Missing 411 website, and you'll be able to see their cluster maps of all the missing people. And when you look at the cluster maps, look at the fact that they're all in national parks, obviously, but around all of those mountain ranges and in those mountains are huge quartz crystal deposits, right where you would expect them to be if they were going to be responsible for missing people. So.
Wow. Well, you've completely scared us to death. Me, anyway. I don't scare easy, but I'm creeped out completely. But I do think that you've been a fabulous guest and really enjoyed having you on.
Thank you so much.
I'd like to have you back again sometime. But where can people find your American Sorcerer book if they're interested in that, or the Paranormal Planet? Is not released yet, but it will be soon, right?
It will be for sure. American Sorcerer is available on Amazon and on audiobook, and Paranormal Planet should be available at the end of this month, February 28th, I think. And that'll also be listed on Amazon. And I hope people love it. There hasn't been, I've not read a paranormal book quite like it. So, and that was the fun in writing it, was talking about all these cases and all of, the various patterns that we've come across. So.
Well, Jack, thank you so much for coming on. We really and truly enjoyed your visit with us, and would like you to come back sometime.
I would love to.
Try to stay safe, because I think the places that you go are very much more bizarre and crazy and scary than the places that we go. So
Oh my
Be
God!
careful
Yeah,
out
that's
there.
what I'm saying. Yeah, have me back. I'll tell you some stories of some of the places.
Yes, we sure will. We sure will.
Well,
Anyway,
thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Well, everyone, we will not be having a show next Sunday. We're going to be out in the field, but we will be back. I think Michael Cook is returning on I don't know what date it is, but it'll be the Sunday after next. So we thank everyone for listening to Night Caller's Bigfoot Radio, and come see us again. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you for listening to Night Caller's Bigfoot Radio.